Hi, my name's Noah Gibbs. I've been a developer for far more years than I like to think about. And I'm talking to Caitlin Quinn of Quinn Media, who generally does awesome communication stuff and has been a brand consultant and several other things, who has a background in communications and in design, graphic design, and has been working to work better with developers by understanding more of what a software developer does, by learning some software development stuff. And she's using the Odin Project, as many right-thinking people do, as part of that project. Um, we thought it would be fun to look through some parts of the Odin Project and get sort of both the newer to it perspective from Caitlin, because she's got perspective that I can't match. And I get a certain amount of looking at it as someone who has never grown up in this world. When I was learning programming, that was fine and all, but like the web didn't exist. That's how different things were. Um, and so just as with other interesting kinds of lessons, it's often useful to see how does it hit? How does it strike somebody new to it, who's the actual student, the person it's intended for, versus what's intended here. We thought with our two perspectives, maybe we could put that together in an interesting way. So, Caitlin, I've talked for a while. Hi, good to
Hello.
see you.
Hey, it's good
um,
to be here. I am new to all of this. Been dabbling and like basically went on Google and found way too many resources, and then found someone recommended the Odin Project to me, I think on Reddit, and I went, okay, this seems like a good way to get a really good grounding in kind of everything I might possibly need to know to work with a developer, and also is really interesting because I'm a language nerd and I like learning languages, and this is just another language in my brain.
yep. Well, it's the connection with linguistics is just so deep and constant and interesting.
Hmm.
I don't know that's a different that's a different like episode, and I'm not gonna get too far into that because oh
Yeah,
man, we could talk for like 10 hours just on that. But sometime when you and I are sitting around and talking, we should totally talk about the old connections to linguistics and computer languages versus human language.
hmm,
Anyway, but probably more interesting to people who are here today, uh, is you've already worked through some of the Odin Project material. I'm intentionally coming in pretty clean. Like I've looked at a
hmm.
little of it because it's hard to miss some of it, but mostly I haven't looked through it yet.
Yes.
Um, so you've worked on at least some of the HTML stuff. You've worked on some of the Git stuff. Uh, what all have you done in the Odin project so far? Where are you at?
So on I'm on the prerequisites. So for anybody taking it, you know that I'm in some, like, I'm right at the beginning. I'm gone through all the installation parts. Um, I think in a lot of ways I'm doing it. Um, I'm doing it how they want me to. I'm diving off a lot into different tacks and like doing my own research. But yeah, I think I need to sit and focus and like go through. But I keep coming up on interesting questions I want to know more about. So yeah, prerequisites is where I'm at. I've done all of my installations. I've got a virtual box because I'm a Windows user, which is did like cause a bit of a problem being a Windows user, I would say.
In some ways, my model of the computer is kind of a set of historical layers because a lot of these things were added one at a time, and I got to see them one at a time because I kept using computers all that time. Hey, we'll add
Yeah.
graphical interfaces. Okay, I'll add graphical interfaces to my model of how computers work.
Yeah.
Um, I assume it's really interesting and difficult building a model of what the computer works like, coming to something as complicated as it is now without seeing those historical layers. Because usually the historical layers, people get them in kind of reverse order. Like it's not like people start on the Apple II at this point.
Yeah, I think that is something that the Odin Project focuses on right up top. Like they want you to know the history, the bait, like the how this even came to be. So there's um there's a whole bit on like so basics of like what front end is, what back end is, and all of that kind of thing. But then it moves on to like how computers, what even is a computer, so, and how a computer stores, retrieves, and processes information, the difference between hardware and software, which I grew I couldn't, like, I needed to get it in my head, so I drew a little, I made a little analogy and drew it. of a little chef. So the computer keeps the ingredients,
Yep.
stores them, gets them out of the pantry, retrieves and stirs them, processes. The ingredients make up the recipe, the physical parts, that's the hardware. And
Yep.
then the recipe tells the ingredients what's to do, and that's the software. So I made my own little, I'm a graphic designer. I've
Yeah.
got to draw it and make it visual.
The
So
way.
that was quite a big, I like that was like very much emphasized and sort of said the beginning. They said like you need to spend a lot of time on this. You need to make sure you've got this in your brain.
Yeah, oh, I absolutely respect the whole get the basics, get them solid. It is really easy to rush past things. I mean, you'll discover you have no matter what, because like that's how learning anything works. But
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you have to keep coming back to the basics and get the basics right, that's a really good focus. I'm thrilled they do that. Similarly, looking through that, I found some of these links to GCF Global, creating opportunities for a better life, but where they have things like, what's a computer, what's hardware, what's software.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, this is fantastic. I'm going to have to sit and read through that because I'm really curious what they think it's worth explaining to people and what it isn't.
yeah.
Um, and it's
Uh,
a fun combination of conceptual stuff like hardware versus software and how do you do a secure password, like the conceptual and the practical. It's neat.
Yeah, the practical. I like having those practical things to hang on to, which I
Yeah,
think is part of why I put them into little diagrams and systems and things and try and work out where it actually sits in a
yeah,
computer, for example, like or in a so like I drew out a CPU and I then like did a thing about RAM and HD and SSD and
nice,
that's a little octopus with all of its little tentacles being different parts.
nice.
Yeah. My
Uh,
favorite thing that they shared was probably like a really old video on how the web worked that
ooh,
had um just very clear diagrams, and I basically just redrew the entire thing because it's just really simple, and it went through to like a client, the internet's a wire. The client, you have servers and a computer connected directly to it. The client talks to the ISP, the internet service provider. And then then they did like a client ISP Gmail example, and then like then Gmail goes to Yahoo and then to the client, like a little diagram, which was really useful to
yeah.
see. Yeah, like you're going to get the impression I really like visual information, which is not something that the Odin project itself does,
Mhm.
but they link out to things that do, and so I seek those out.
Yeah, actually, that's fantastic. Something that would be useful would be keeping a list of the things you found most interesting there. Like, I don't know if you're looking to do more blog posts along the same line, and if people are interested, like, there's so much we could say here. But oh man, would that be a valuable thing to other people? And I say that partly because um, weirdly, computer programming, and especially old computer programmers, the culture has a shocking deficit of that. I could give you a couple
Okay.
of different reasons why, but we're really terrible about not emphasizing that as hard as teaching broadly does. Um,
Like sharing the basics, or what is it
Sharing
that
visual information,
mm,
visual information. So
yeah.
uh, let me give you a tiny little fraction that I think illustrates it well. Why we've part of why we've got that bias. So if I talk about a visual programming language or something like Scratch, have you encountered that?
I have not.
Okay, Scratch is sort of pushed as a tool for children.
Right, okay.
I've taught my kids with it. It's a great tool. But it's also like it's a serious high quality tool underneath. There's a language
Mm.
called Smalltalk that isn't used very much anymore. It's a historical language, but it's incredibly influential. Scratch is Smalltalk under the hood. Like it runs a full serious quality programming language under the hood. What makes it distinctive to look at is that instead of typing your code in characters the way the vast majority of professionals do in a text editor, it's a terrible interface. We just haven't found anything better yet. What you do is you snap blocks together to put a loop. You drag and drop the loop, and you put the stuff in the loop. And they have this lovely metaphor where the different return values have different shapes of blocks. So if it's got
Mm.
pointy corners, then that means it's a Boolean condition. It's either true or false. And so only the ones that return a Boolean condition fit in there, which is
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's so good. I love that. And the
Yeah.
design is really well put together. You snap the blocks together because there's a great phrase from the Haskell people, make illegal states unrepresentable. And what they mean is if something isn't going to work, make it, difficult to actually put together the thing that won't do anything, and that they're just going to have to give you the little meh.
Yeah.
Fewer opportunities for the you screwed up noise by just not making it. Anyway, Scratch, beautiful design on all of this. And if you use Scratch for a while as a professional programmer, the vast majority of us never do, and I think that's tragic. Like, it's so
Hmm.
good. You discover why even really good visual programming languages only get so far. There are only a few domains where visual programming languages are actually used by serious professionals.
Hmm.
Um, and the short version of that is that as you do things with more complexity, you wind up with a function call that has, 5 or 6 or 8 different parameters. Your thing here is hooked up to 6 or 8 other things. And it turns out that actually visually representing all of those connections turns into a complete scramble of visual spaghetti immediately. It gets too hard very, very quickly. And the way Scratch handles this is by having really simple connections to everything, and then it kind of throws up its hands in despair at the point where the individual little pieces talk to the bigger pieces. I don't, by
Yeah.
throws up its hands in despair, I don't mean it does a bad thing. I mean, it decides that the standard way you would represent those things in text is just not going to work here. And what it does is it sends a signal. So if you want your method to call another method, if you have a set of instructions where you say do this as an internal thing. Sorry, if I say method calls, have you done much with that?
Nope.
Okay. Well, you talk about software as recipes, which is a really good analogy. So let's talk
Yeah.
about software as recipes as the analogy for this bit. Um, a method is a series of steps. You tell the program, here is the name of the thing, and here is a set of steps that make that thing.
Okay.
And so,
And
for
the
example,
call is like, is that like the computer going, I need this recipe.
well, so if the call was sponge cake, then the
Mhm.
individual components would be flour and eggs and, the things you
Oh,
add, when
okay,
you add
okay.
them, and how you add them. And
Yeah.
so if you imagine a big complicated Mary Berry recipe from the British Bake Off, Great British Bake Off, you can imagine a big complicated recipe like a layer cake having a point where she doesn't give you all the instructions. She just says, and now you make a 9-inch sponge cake.
Yeah.
And there can be some things you specify, make a 9-inch sponge cake. But
Yeah.
fundamentally, she understands you know how to make a sponge cake, and she just
Yeah.
tells you sponge cake. And so, in
Yeah.
some sense, sponge cake has become a method call. It represents a long series of steps, but it's a very short, pithy way to do it. Sponge cake,
Yeah.
9 inches, go. So, sponge cake 9 inches go is a method call, and how you turn make a 9-inch sponge cake into a long series of put in the flour, put in the eggs, etc. when you stir is the implementation, the method body, how you write the method.
Yeah.
Computer programming is minute by minute almost all that. Like,
Yeah.
you're almost always writing methods which call other methods, and writing methods that call other methods makes
I'm
sense,
going,
right? In the
oh
middle of
no, I got some shell in it. Ah.
You do, yes, and figuring out what step in the process to do all of that is really hard, because computers are very rigid, and so you have to know exactly what step it's going to do that at.
Yeah.
Not because there's only one place you could do it, but because the computer is only going to do it exactly where you told it. So,
Yeah.
pick the place. Anyway, yeah, method calls. So in Scratch, which again is designed for children, it's designed to have a friendly interface, it's designed for people who haven't programmed much. So it's a full power environment with a friendly interface, which is always it's a hard line to walk. Um, where a method would usually invoke another method, like where you're in the middle of writing your code and you say, do this step, move this over, move this up, start an animation where this gets bigger. Great. The next step is to draw a whole little unicorn that's going to move in a circle. Well, I wrote a thing that is move a unicorn in a circle over here. So I want to say move the unicorn in the circle here. Um, so that's a method call, right? You move the unicorn in a circle. You want to move the unicorn in the circle. You say, move the unicorn in the circle. Here's the spot. Here's how fast. Go.
Mhm.
Like make a sponge cake, right? You've got a
Yeah.
series of steps. You say, do the series of steps. Um, in a standard programming language, when you make the method call, the thing that calls it stops. It does the series of steps, and then it comes back. You've, it's the equivalent of there is one cook in the kitchen. If you say, make a sponge cake, you're going to stop, you're going to go make the sponge cake, and when you're done, you're going to come back.
Okay, so it's the return, like it doesn't just make the sponge cake and then sit there. It makes the sponge cake and then goes back and goes, give me more instructions.
Well, it makes a sponge cake, and then it goes back to whatever you were doing when you said make the sponge cake.
Oh, I see. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So it
So if
returns to the previous set of instructions.
yes, if you
Like
are
the
in the
recipe
middle,
book, possibly.
Yeah, if you are in the middle of the recipe that says make a 3-layer cake with raspberry filling between, and at this point it says make a sponge cake, you are
Yeah.
going to go over here to the sponge cake recipe, do it, and come back. You may do it multiple times. It is entirely possible that this will say make a sponge cake, make a raspberry, make a sponge cake, make a raspberry. You may go back and forth to the same method multiple times. In fact, because programmers are hideous, and once we find a trick, we want to use it in every horrible way we possibly can, sometimes a recipe will invoke itself.
Of
And we call
course.
that recursion. And it's
Ooh.
yes, it's terrible to think through. It's so much fun. Um,
I think we should put a note at the top of this episode just to
hmm.
say, hello, everybody. There will be baking metaphors throughout this podcast.
Well, they're fantastic. They so are. They're so good. But one of the joys of being a programmer, and I guess people just starting may not know this yet, so I should mention it, is that we cheerfully mix metaphors everywhere. Mixed
Hmm.
metaphors are the mixed metaphors are the bread and butter of our croquet tournament.
I love it.
Uh, well, that's good
We,
because you're stuck with it.
you're trying to, I mean, you're trying to explain something that is, it's like you're trying to explain a system. Anytime you're trying to explain a system, it's very difficult because I don't think people's brains work that way in not often, not all, like I don't know, I'm not speaking for everybody, but my brain certainly doesn't work in like if this then that. Like
Yes.
if only I was so organized and logical, but I am not. Which is
Oh,
fine. Like that's why we use computers. Like that they do the bits that our brains are like.
yeah. Well, don't worry. Once you've been instructing a computer for longer, you will absolutely stop looking at it and say, "If only my brain worked like that." You will be much more likely to say, "Oh, I'm so glad my brain doesn't work like that."
Yeah.
No, computers are the ultimate bureaucrats. In
Yeah.
the same way that you don't look at a really efficient government clerk and say, I'm so in awe of the way that you fill out Form 1379.6." No,
Yes.
like them getting more efficient at it doesn't increase your sense of awe. Eventually, you will see computers as like that because you'll be dealing with them in that capacity constantly.
To me, they're like a tool, but
Hmm,
a tool that you has so many possibilities that
hmm,
you could learn how to use. The thing that I find overwhelming is I know that there are so many different things that I could do, and it's like it's now started like I want to learn to sort of communicate properly with web devs, but even just talking, like I spoke to someone the other day who in their entire job is email. That is
hmm.
all they do. They
Oh
just
yes.
do email, and they said that they struggle to communicate with some of their other colleagues who are also web devs because they do completely different things, and like a lot of the systems that they use are older and they do a lot of HTML stuff, and it's just almost a different system and a throwback. And
Hmm.
so if the two different web devs are struggling to communicate with each other, what hope do I have?
If you decide you want to learn French, it turns out there's a lot of French, and there's a lot of French because there's a lot of nouns and there's a lot of verbs. There's a lot of French for a lot of reasons. But if you want to learn French, one of the things that is going to happen is people are going to mention France. Sad but true. Uh, um, but no, if you're trying to learn French, things like whether the city of Nice has a nice main street with a lot of shopping on it suddenly becomes relevant. And so
Yeah.
when I say French is large, yes, it's got a lot of nouns and verbs, but in some sense that's the simple kind of large, right? You've literally got a dictionary that you could look through and you could find maybe not all the nouns and verbs, but an awful lot of them, all of the common ones. And if you pretend you were going to sit and memorize the dictionary, in some sense that would take care of it, and in another sense it wouldn't at all, because French is large because human activity is large.
Hmm.
And the difference between I want to learn French because I have a team of Frenchmen that I want to organize into the back kitchen of my fancy restaurant is rather
Hmm.
different from I want to learn French because I want to seem cosmopolitan and well traveled everywhere, is very different from I'd like to flirt with the tourist girls who mostly speak French in this North African town that I visit regularly.
Yeah.
Um, that's French is large because people are everything. And so when you say computers are large, it's easy to think that what I mean is there's a lot of little transistors in there, which there are. There
There are
are.
that too.
But no, human culture around computers is large because it's a human culture.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, there are that many systems because there's that much of that going on. I think it's certainly fair to say that computers as a topic is at least as much sort of people doing things and stuff going on as France as a topic.
Hmm.
And boy,
Yes.
France is big enough; it's hard to just learn it.
Yeah.
Like learning all of French is not a thing that that,
No,
as far as I know, anyone can do.
no, maybe a computer. But it can't have a
Well,
conversation with you about it.
indeed, indeed. Yes, LLMs are the idea that you can pretend the computer can have a
Have a
conversation by just
conversation with
recording
you,
a lot of
but
French people and splicing the
yeah,
results together.
you're just having a conversation with a lot of French people then,
Yes,
which
yes.
could be overwhelming. Not, we don't want to, I'm not bashing the French, just to be clear.
Oh no, having a lot of conversation with a lot of Americans would also be overwhelming, possibly more
Hmm.
so, really. Um,
But yes,
uh,
Odin Project.
Odin Project, yes. So yeah, and so yeah, there's certainly a lot to learn here, and with the Odin Project, as with anything else, a lot of it's kind of narrowing your focus. One thing I love is that they have these sort of top level tracks because that at least tells you where to start learning.
Yeah.
As you say, you could you talk about this stuff forever.
I'm
Computer basics,
doing
how the web
I'm
work.
doing command line basics at the moment.
Excellent. Oh, okay. So we talked a little about Git, but maybe you
I
haven't
did
done much with Git
well,
yet.
I did set it up and then went back again because I wanted to do the command line stuff again. Just to actually touch something like not theoretical. Which I guess is one of the things that I'm struggling with. Like I know that there's a lot of upfront learning, but
Yeah.
I want to do something. Like I find it a lot easier to keep in my head when
Yeah.
there's a task that I can connect all that knowledge to. Like it's why I
Yes.
do all of my drawings. I need something to the way most people learn, I say probably everybody, is you
Hmm.
make connections between different things, and that's how it
Yes.
stays in your brain. And for me, I find it helpful to make connections with drawings and metaphorical concepts, and also with actual projects.
Hmm.
And I know that from looking at the course, I'm not going to get to a project until the end of HTML Foundations, and I'm
Yeah.
sad.
That makes sense.
I want a
Well,
project.
I'll mention one possible thing, and you can tell me whether this sounds like a reasonable thing. So again, I learned back in the day in ways that at this point nobody learns. Um, but you talked about setting up a virtual machine as part of
Hmm.
this. Now, the nice
Yes.
thing about a virtual machine, and this may be why they do it this way, is that it limits the blast radius of anything you do wrong.
Yes.
Like there's a really obvious set of boundaries around a virtual machine where
Mm.
the most damage you can do is to destroy the virtual machine.
Hmm.
You could do less damage than that, but that's the most damage that you can really do. Um,
Yeah.
well, then that's good, right? I mean, I learned on an old DOS machine before version 3 of Windows, so before anybody actually used, graphical interfaces widely. Um, and I did do a lot of like read through the book of commands and type commands, and I did a certain amount of messing the computer up, and some of it I learned by, oh, I've done this thing and the computer is not working well, and I can attempt to fix things with
Mm.
varying levels of success, but um, the joy of Windows and DOS was that very often it would screw itself up completely anyway. And so you were going to have to reinstall the computer on a regular basis. Like Microsoft had already taken care of that for you. Like if you didn't screw it up, they were gonna. Um, but that meant, it gave you a certain sense of freedom, right? Um,
Hmm.
I was lucky. I wasn't sharing with the computer with anybody else. This was before really networking was much of a thing.
Mm.
This was before networking was a thing other than a few specific labs, and those people got famous, but I
That
wasn't
that's
anywhere
gonna
near any
say
of
that's the
that.
universities, right?
There were at
Or-
the time either 4 or 5 universities on the internet.
Yeah, I
And
know about this.
eventually,
This is one of the lessons in the project.
I went to one of those universities. When people talk about, modems and dial-up internet and all of that, like I essentially skipped that completely because I went from the middle of nowhere to Carnegie Mellon with actual wired internet connected to the internet. Um, so there's a whole era in there that I missed completely just by standing in the wrong place. But I do know a fair bit about, Carnegie Mellon and the early internet. It was a lot more than 5 universities by the time I got there,
Hmm.
but you could tell where the initial sort of places were. Anyway, sorry. So being able to mess around and virtual machine. A neat thing about virtual machine is that you can make a copy of it. That is to say, if you decided you were going to tear it down, one of the things that you could do is take the virtual machine that you set up, shut it down, make a copy, pick one of the 2 copies, boot it up, and then see if you can tear the walls down.
Ah, fun.
Um, yeah,
I
yeah,
get to destroy it.
yes. Well, I don't know about you, but I find a lot of people move really timidly in their own computers for the same reason that somebody without a lot of construction experience, like me, moves
Mm,
timidly in their own house. Like,
mhm.
on the one hand, it's probably unlikely that you're going to knock down even a drywall wall. They don't say
Yeah,
drywall. What do they say here? They've got a different name for drywall in the UK. Plasterboard. It's
plasterboard.
unlikely you'll knock down even a plasterboard wall, but the consequences for doing so are high enough that you're not going to like just bang into it randomly on the off chance.
Mm,
I don't. Um, and so it's really easy to not have a feeling for what parts of the computer are strong structurally.
mm.
Because if you've never knocked it down, one possibility is that it's strong and you're fine. And another possibility is that you just never, put your shoulder into that plasterboard wall. And the
Like, is
night
this an essential step in? Is this an essential step in the recipe? Like, I don't know, flour, or can I ignore it? It like vanilla flavoring, vanilla essence.
there's definitely some of that, yeah. The closely related to that, uh how you treat a particular step with cooking, literally cooking. Very often what you do matters a lot. Like you get to a pancake recipe and they tell you to almost never stir, and you get to a pugliese Italian bread recipe and you stir like hell and you knead and knead and knead. Um and the differences in the gluten. And if you've only read either a pugliese recipe or a pancake recipe, it would be really easy not to understand that gluten behaves in this completely other way if you treat it differently.
Mm,
And so that step, it's important how you treat the gluten, and you
yeah,
only know that if you've done a bunch of recipes. Um, Whereas if you've got something like eggs and you say, oh, like I've salted the eggs and I've stirred a little bit, but like, do I need to beat the eggs for 10 minutes? Would it help if I did? And the answer is no. It
mm,
doesn't matter. Do it or don't do it, whatever you feel like. But again, you don't know that because you haven't tried it both ways. So yeah,
mm,
being able to copy the VM and bang around in there seriously is kind of like making another copy of the recipe where this time I'm going to beat the eggs for 15 minutes and see what happens. Um, they said never stir in the pancakes. I'm going to stir and stir and stir and see what kind of pancakes I get.
yeah.
Aha, take that pancakes. Um, yeah, and so I actually kind of see why they don't do, we talked about using the Windows subsystem for Linux with Ruby. And actually, while it's true that it was pretty cruddy around about the time the Odin project was starting, so they probably initially didn't recommend it because when they started, it wasn't good. Now it's good. The other thing is you probably don't want people installing stuff locally on their computer and messing around too much, just broadly. Like the
Yeah,
nice thing about a VM is, again, limited blast radius, and it's sort of inconvenient. But
yeah.
man, it's nice as well to be able to say the worst you can do in here is to destroy just this thing. And if you destroy this thing, at worst, delete the image, uninstall the software, and you're back where you started.
The thing that kind of so they give you the options: a virtual box virtual machine, a
Yeah.
dual boot Ubuntu installation, or a Windows subsystem for Linux, which is the WSL2
Yes.
thing.
Yep.
Um, and the one that seemed like it would be long term most useful is like maybe the dual boot, so you could choose what you were. But it also, I read through the instructions and went, no, it would probably be easier for me to save up and eventually just get myself a Mac that I could do this on. If this is something that I spend a lot of time doing, that would probably be worth it. Yeah, so hence the going with the virtual box, I guess.
Something I'll point out as yet another option, because boy, if there's anything that programming stuff is long on, it's other options. There's always 50 ways to do it, and most of them are terrible. But one other possibility, given that Macs are quite expensive, is that if you set up a Linux box, you will
Mm-hmm.
get the vast majority of the benefit you would get from switching to Mac,
Ooh,
but you don't need the expensive hardware. But the
cool.
flip side is you'll have to deal with a Linux box.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, that's fine. For some people, that's not so good. But most of what makes Mac so good for this stuff is its resemblance to Unix, and
Mm-hmm.
Linux is even farther in that Unix direction.
Yeah.
The standard setup for professional Ruby shops is almost always develop on Mac, deploy on Linux. That's
Okay.
basically how all of them do it across the board. Um,
Yeah.
you might say, but if they all develop on Mac, doesn't mean that all the good development tools are on Mac. And weirdly, no.
Hmm.
Weirdly, no. Um, Programmers are like Corvette enthusiasts, old Corvette enthusiasts, in the sense that we spend a lot of time with the hood open. And so a lot of various quality of life improvements for the final user, like modern cars where you can't do your own service, are kind of the bane of our existence.
Yeah.
If you give a car enthusiast a 1950s Corvette that he can deal with a wrench, an air hammer, and one of those sandblasting things, like to some
Mhm.
extent he's as happy as he's going to be. In From that very weird specific perspective, like cars peaked in the 1950s because that was
Mm.
when you could do the most easiest repair of them. And so modern computers have some of the same problems, a lot of the same problems.
Yeah.
Um, Linux is as much like an old Corvette as you're going to get in the modern age. Um, the kernel is open, by which I mean the full code for it is available. Like it used to be a really standard thing to recompile your Linux kernel. I've probably done it, 400 or 500 times in
Mhm.
my lifetime. Because if you run Linux, like you do that. If you're adding
Yeah.
hardware, great. Like make a new custom kernel that supports that hardware.
Mhm.
For a long time, that was the only way to do it. Um,
So that's like open software,
yes, open source.
okay, open
Yeah.
source.
So Mac runs with a thick, deep layer of open source software, and even a lot of their underlayers are open. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But then it has closed software all around it.
Mm.
Windows is the same, but with a different proportion. Windows is a lot more closed compared to the amount of open. It's some open. Like it turns out the way
Okay.
Windows does networking is taken straight out of BSD, which is again one of those Linuxes. It's a less common one, but it's
Mm.
not one of the Unixes. There is one Linux. Sorry, one of the Unixes. Um, people doing all of these things are picky about their vocabulary. Anyway, but yeah, everybody's got some open. Everybody's got some open. Nearly everybody has at least some amount of close.
Mhm.
Um, as open as it gets often still means that like device drivers from a particular company that make a particular video card do what it does. Often there's still some closed source in weird little corners like that.
Yeah.
But the more open it is, the more pieces you, the programmer, can poke into.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you're on Mac and you say, gee, I'd like to debug this process, I wonder how I can do that. There are a lot of pieces of that where you can read documentation, you can read blog posts, but you may have a very specific question about how it works that you just can't answer.
Yeah.
Can't is too strong. You can you can take a binary debugger and you can eventually tear that down, but it would be an incredibly large amount of work to try and figure out how everything works there. Whereas on Linux, um, if you learn how to read C, which is the language most stuff in Linux
Mhm.
is written in, there's an excellent chance that anything that you want to look at, like okay, if you're dealing with the video driver, you will hit a point where you can't see all the way into the video driver, but you can see everything that talks to it. And if you want to make a
Mhm.
custom version that does something different, you can. Like by knowing C, you can do that.
Mm.
Um, and the yeah. Uh, so here, my perspective on this is a little uncommon because I went from being a C programmer down in the guts of the weird systems level stuff to being a Ruby programmer.
Mhm.
And in C, everything takes so many lines of code that it's easy to find things that are hundreds of thousands of lines and not hard to find things that are millions of lines. And so if you want to know what a C program does, like you're reading a ton of stuff. Um,
Yeah, it's like it's the step from binary code to C and then like C plus plus, blah, 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 like adding more layers, I guess.
yeah,
C is really close to the binary code.
yes, C is somebody who is reasonably well educated in C can probably tell you what the binary code is doing. And there are lovely websites where you can type the C code and it'll cheerfully show you for a given processor exactly, byte by byte what it makes. Because
That's
if you're
really
working,
cool.
yeah, oh, it absolutely. Godbolt.org is where it does that for a variety of languages. Like you put the code on the left and it cheerfully shows you what comes out of the code on the right. Um, yeah, well, and again, open stuff is so good for that. Where I got onto this was the open source thing. If you have open tools and open platforms, you can build really interesting tooling around it.
Mm.
Whereas if you've got something where they make you keep your hands off things, then as a mechanic, you've got limited ability to see and touch. And that,
Yeah.
as frustrated as you are about not having a little project to do, and so I was suggesting various ways that you can go in and kind of make trouble for yourself in a way that's a good
Not destructive.
or the right kind of destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a coincidence that I can, just say that off the top of my head because it's like me too, right? The fact that you want to go in and like mess with the stuff is a good sign that you're in the right profession learning programming stuff. the fact that you want to get in and mess with it is a really good sign.
Yeah, I am. I guess it's like having one of those those rage rooms where you go in with a hammer and get to smash stuff. Yeah, I feel like also like I think when you are explaining, just to give you a better, I think I understand about like 2/3 of what you're saying, but I imagine the people listening will know what you're talking about.
Mm, there are a bunch of old people like me who will understand a much higher percentage of what I'm talking about. And what I'm trying to do is keep a lot of the things that I say broad in a useful way. Like if I say the C language, I assume that relatively few people listening to me just know C well off the top of their head. Some people do,
Mm,
but relatively few, I assume, know that. But frankly, I think my assumption is that we're targeting this at people closer to your level of experience than to mine.
mm. I
Um,
mean, I can ask more questions.
Please do. Please
Like
do.
I'd be like, sorry, what's that? What's that? What's that?
No, that would actually be fantastic.
But also part of learning is accepting that you don't know everything yet, but you can still sort of like carry on and make your way through.
Yes.
My struggle is every time there's a new phrase in the Odin Project, I'm like, oh, I want to know what that is. Like,
Yep.
which is not conducive to moving forward.
Well, and so the way I handle that in my own life, um, is to make sure I'm doing a certain amount of screwing around clearly on the path to the goal they set.
Yeah,
And so that actually, again, sort of circles right back to what if I had a way to mess around with stuff on the
yeah.
path to the goal they set?
I
Um,
want I want a scrappy sketchbook and a neat sketchbook.
yes. And so being able to do things like make a copy of the VM gives you a really good opportunity for a scrappy sketchbook.
Mm,
You're going to have to decide how often to copy it because VMs are big, but like, it's big in the same way having big files is always big, right? Like
yeah.
you can copy it, you can get rid of it. Like you get to decide how much disk space to put into this. Yeah, let's see. What was the last thing? Oh, I was looking at command line basics. Um, how do they tell you to find out more about it? So
Um,
this is one of those things that's very different for me than it's going to be for anybody modern.
Yeah, so you usually have like your intro, your lesson overview, you do like a test drive, so like just make sure that the thing that you've set up works, like it's functioning.
Hmm.
Um, and then you have an assignment, but again, like I don't know, it's the assignment is like often to read this, learn about this, download this,
Hmm.
like follow this set of instructions, which is cool and like good, and I like that. That's like giving me something to do.
Yeah.
Um, and then they'll tell you to. So the command line was installing some of the things that you needed.
Hmm.
So we did a thing about task about tab completion, and then
I'm
uh
seeing one on pipes and filters. Those are awesome.
and
Uh,
then you get to the knowledge check, which is like a big list of questions, and then you can click on the questions if you want to have an explanation about it. But I think the thing that I find is that often when you so like what is the command line, for example,
yeah.
um that would take you back to command line basics so you can read the whole thing again. Or do you like do you open the command line, how do you open the command line on your computer? That would take you back to like the whole lesson. And so part of the
Yeah.
reason I guess why, even though they say not to take notes, I find that if I structure my learning around questions, I retain things easier, and I will then do my like little diagrams around questions. So quite often
Yeah.
what I'll do is I'll go to the knowledge check and I'll go, right, what are the questions that at the end of this lesson I want to be able to answer? Okay, right. So then I can focus in on some of that information, and I
Yeah.
find that easier. I know that at the beginning they say like in like lesson overview, which is what you're going to learn in this lesson,
Yeah.
which is cool. But for me personally, I like a question. Like I need it to be a question that I'm answering. That just works for my brain better. So like
Yeah.
describe what the command line is. I'd probably make it into give me an example of something that the like what is the command line, and give me an example of something that it does.
Yep.
Um,
When
how
would we use this tool?
when would you use this tool? How do you open the command line on your computer?
Hmm.
Um, And
Well,
then it gives you like the tasks might be use the command line. So use the command line to navigate directories and display directory contents, which so I guess I don't know. I like questions. I
yeah,
want more questions to be able to hang things onto. It's like it's where it's like I'm hanging. How do I hang my knowledge on this? And
yeah,
prompts I find a bit harder.
yeah.
Questions I find a lot easier to hang things onto.
Now you're in a
But
really interesting position. Like I was interested by some of the things you had to say about this, because of course, uh, a huge percentage of the people learning programming that you talk to, you say, "Why are you learning programming?" They say to get a job. Um, and it's fine. There's an awful lot for those people out there. There's a lot of very good content for those people out there, but
mm,
it's necessarily a bit of a weird target to get a job because what do you want? Well, whatever companies want. Like, and it changes all the time. How well do
yeah,
you want to understand this? Well enough to get paid for it. Like
yeah,
it's very limiting, right? Um, it is a little like the difference between a fine artist and a house painter. Like there aren't a ton of fine art jobs. If you decide I want to get a job and do it by painting, you should probably learn to be a house painter because it's clear where the jobs are. It's clear what that takes. But of course,
yeah,
it's not what most people think when you say I want to learn painting. I
yeah,
won't say computer programming is necessarily that different,
mm,
but there are a lot of similarities. There
yeah,
are a lot of what we're doing is sort of teaching house painting, and
yeah.
nothing wrong with house painting. Nothing wrong with either literal or metaphorical house painting.
Mm,
Um, so what you'd said was you wanted to learn to, work better with developers and you wanted to be able to sort of debug more of what you produced, which
yeah,
is a fantastic thing. That's
yeah,
I'm a big fan of find the problems in the workflow and go where the problems are. But be careful of
mm.
that because if you do too much of that, you wind up in operations. I've certainly been through that. They're wonderful people, but like it's still a terrible job.
I
Like
was talking
computer.
to my friend and she said the way you talk, it sounds like if you wanted to work in this, it sounds like you would be doing all of the debugging. The people would be like, I have a problem and I can't fix it. Please, can you sort this out? Like that was you just end up doing that all day. I was like, well, I mean, it would be terrible. I probably quite enjoy it.
So at one of my previous jobs, they referred to me as the Oracle
Oh,
because well, and it was because whatever the weird, tool was, like if you went for a while and you got stuck for long enough, okay, time to take it to Noah. Um, and it's not a great job, but it's great work. And I keep coming back to this is like computer programming itself. Like the job conditions are not perfect, but man, the work is good. So I talk about once I learned more about music, I felt okay saying I talk about it like a musician, but I really do. Like, I love the work. And I
yeah.
don't love the work because it's useful for something. I love the work because I love the work.
Mm,
Um, but when you talk about interfacing with developers, that's interesting because it gives you a rich source of those questions.
yeah.
Like if you're doing it right, it gives you a gorgeous source of those questions because it's like a lot of these questions are hard if you say to get a job because you put all of your priorities in somebody else's hands. What do I
Yeah.
want? Well, I want whatever my future employer wants. Who's your future employer? Well, whoever wants whatever it is I wind up learning that's useful here.
And you
Um,
also don't know because everything's moving so fast.
and it
So
will.
it's you need to almost be you need to be a sponge in a lot of ways. You need to learn for the sake of learning. And I'm not saying obviously that you can't get a job or that it won't be useful to you. I just mean that you need to be so open to being like, okay, cool. So I need to know this now.
Yeah,
Oh, I need to know this now. Oh, I need to continuously learn all of this new stuff,
yeah.
which is so it's never going to be one. I don't know. It doesn't sound like it's never going to be one and done. You're not like I have done this
Oh no,
course and now I am a developer. It's like
no.
now I am a whatever. No, you have to always be learning and things are always moving and like there are so many tools now, for example, where you get I've been suggested for like get AI to code this for you and things like
Yeah,
that. And I'm not but the problem with that is if like for someone like me, I need I can't look at that and go, how do I fix it? Like what are the
yeah,
things that are broken? What's the problem?
yeah,
Um something like they sound like they could be a useful tool to save time for someone who really knows what they're doing
yeah,
because they can go excellent, like I don't want to have to just like physically I don't want to have to sit here and type this
yeah,
like so I'll tell the computer I want you to do this and this and I'll go through and go not this
yeah,
like and rearrange it.
yeah.
But yeah.
Well, to talk about another place where programmer culture is not serving you well, because it's closely related to what you just said. Um, so there's this thing artists have figured out that programmers are constitutionally incapable of figuring out because our whole profession revolves around not understanding this. Um, Fundamentally, if you take a small, simple thing and you do it over and over, you get better at it.
Mm,
There's a reason we're terrible at that. There's a reason we have, pejorative phrases like reinventing the wheel, to talk about how you shouldn't go do the simple thing over and over. And you'll
mm,
notice most of us are terrible at these things
mm,
because we dislike as a profession, we believe that once a task has been done, it should be automated and now you can stop doing it. And there's a
mm,
lot of power in that. And it's the exact opposite kind of power from the sort of person who spends 10 years figuring out how to make paint marks very exactly with a brush on the canvas and be able to make a really good paint mark for every situation.
yeah.
We're often terrible at that second thing. Um, so LLMs, AI tools to write code for you.
Large
There
language
is,
models, yeah.
yeah, large language model. So yes, thank you. LLMs, large language models, exactly so. Um, Sure, there's the debugging problem, and that is absolutely a part of why you need to be careful with them. And I think your instincts are just perfect here. What you currently feel is exactly how you should feel right now, and you will know better that it's safe to use them when you're more advanced because it will feel better when you do it. It sounds like your instincts are serving you very well here. Yay. Um, the other thing is that it's very easy to do what some people do on the piano, say, where they say, okay, I can only play with one hand at a time, but I'll use one of these electronic things that let me, play down 6 tracks by playing them one at a time. And what you don't realize by not getting into the more complicated piano stuff with both hands is that you're not as good with one hand either. And so you've got 6 tracks, but they're all kind of pretty. Uh,
Mm,
a lot of why you do the piano stuff that seems silly, right? Why do I need to learn to stretch my hand out really far in order to play 2 notes that are far apart? That's barbaric. And it
mm,
kind of is, but also that by doing all of these things people have been doing for how many years, you learn to get good at the things that everybody assumes you'll know as a pianist.
mm,
And in the modern era, you've got a way to sort of short circuit all that, but it turns out it won't make you good. It'll just make you short circuit all that.
mm.
Um,
But
LLMs,
then, but then there's also like this concept that I hear a lot of minimum viable product,
sure, yes,
which I think that is really interesting,
yeah,
as even coming in from a design perspective and as a newbie. So,
mhm,
for example, I need to rebuild my website because I'm using Wix and
yeah,
I want my website that is accessible because
yeah,
that's really important to me.
yeah,
And Wix is just it's like wrangling a like I don't know a dog that doesn't want to come home. It's just a nightmare,
yeah,
and I need to kind of start from the beginning, but
yeah,
I don't know enough to be able to do that. I
yeah,
I don't know. It feels sorry.
yeah.
I'm waving my hands around for people listening. It's just like so much.
Yeah. Well, and so there's a kind of a deep and normal conflict at this point in your learning that would be true no matter what you were learning, but it's certainly true in computers. Um, there's the little low-level basics, the fundamentals, and then there's the practical stuff on top, and it's really hard to get those two to meet in the middle. It's really hard to
Mm,
sort of grow down from the practical and grow up to from the fundamentals till they meet.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, Wix is a great example of, you get this big practical boost, but also once you care about the fundamentals, it's really hard to reach down into those. And
yeah,
different tools are at different points on there. Some tools are really like, I'm going to give you the fundamentals and you're going to assemble everything above that on your own. Good luck. And some are the opposite. I'm going to give you the top level practical thing, and if you want to control the specifics, good luck.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and it's hard because so I tend toward the slow fundamentals based learning of everything, right?
yeah,
Like if you were to listen to me on the piano, you'd discover that my 2 years of practice, I'm not bad, and there's a bunch of stuff I can do. But oh man, do I sound like a guy who's been worrying about drills and theory rather than necessarily trying to play the prettiest sounding stuff.
yeah,
I'm getting good, but it's taken me a while because I came from that bottom direction, and if you come from really far on one side or the other, it takes you a while to get good at the other one.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, programming absolutely has the same thing. And so when I say, it's interesting talking to people who came to the computer with it already being this complicated thing. I absolutely came at programming from the same direction because an awful lot of what's now practical just didn't exist when I was learning it. Like,
mm,
of course, I came from the other direction. That was the one that existed.
yeah,
Uh, um, and so, yeah, when you talk about learning new stuff all the time, that's a really interesting. is an interesting thing related to that, because you could say, oh, you've got this giant, like, multi-year learning process to get from the two sides, and boy, they come up with new things all the time. Like, am I just completely screwed? And the answer is that for the vast majority of languages and for every popular language, there's a core mental set of concepts that these languages reflect in slightly different ways. But fundamentally, there's a core set of programming concepts that every program is made of. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's not difficult like if you had to learn cooking one year and painting the next year. It's difficult like if you had to learn cooking in French one year and cooking in Romanian the next year. There's a really core set of concepts underneath. And on the one
Yeah.
hand, you would express it a little differently in Romanian than you did in French. And on the other hand, like, your mental model can have a lot in common between those two.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I have a fair number of recipe books in Italian,
Hmm.
and even if my Italian vocabulary for cooking is pretty good, but like it's not, I'm not going to get all of the words.
Yeah,
But I know enough about how recipes work and
yeah,
context to figure out the rest of it. Like if it's like an ingredient or a process, I'm like, okay, well, this would probably be the time where I would, I don't know, take it and roll it out. Okay,
yeah.
that seems like that's probably what that word is.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's different languages with these different concepts. Sure, there are different ways you sort of most elegantly express a thing, and there are different. If for some reason you knew three different languages, you could imagine picking the one that the recipe would come out best in. There's a lot of computer programming that is weirdly like that. But yeah, a lot of the concepts are really similar. Like, there's a fun little contest that computer programmers like doing. Like, if I was to say, oh yes, every language basically works like C, everybody would come out of the woodwork to say, here's this thing C doesn't do. Um, this is nothing like C. C is all destructive assignment. Here's a language with no destructive assignment. And the thing is that even for languages that are really weird, which between you and me don't get used for a lot in production, like the farther a language is from this sort of bright center of where everybody tends to work, um, the weirder a use case has to be before you would use it,
Mm,
because it's so much harder to get programmers that understand this thing that doesn't teach you useful stuff for the entire rest of the programming world.
mm,
Um, there there's not a lingua franca, but there's a set of concepts where once you've gotten comfortable in them, you have, this mental model. You'll be able to express it in 20 different languages with a few minutes of Googling and figuring out, here's what a basic loop looks like in this language. Here's what a basic loop looks like in this other language. I'm
mm,
looking for, a basic if statement. Here's a basic if statement. I'm looking for an assignment. Here's an assignment. I'm looking for a comparison. Here's a comparison. Cool. I can go.
mhm.
Um, the hardest languages are the ones that are fundamentally different from that, where instead of having one of these standard models, they say, we're going to take this whole thing that you knew and replace it with a completely different way of doing it. And those are bizarre specialty languages. Only a few of them exist, and they exist generally for very good reasons.
Mm, yeah. And someone to get to that point, you've probably specialized and specialized and specialized, and that's
Um,
maybe or that's what you do most of the time.
don't overestimate the quality of programming education. Uh, it would be wonderful if, for a heavily concurrent language where you have a whole bunch of things all going at once and you have to coordinate things going on between, which is very much a specialty in computer programming. And you might say, surely there are tools for that. And there are. There totally are. There are tools for that. But a lot of it's done with the standard tools anyway, because companies do not want to pay for the level of education it would take for somebody to be seriously, seriously specialized in that. You have a few, like, high-end theorists who got their doctorate in topics related to that, and they are really specialized, but they're going to hire a team of whoever you can hire off the street,
It's
programming wise.
also I'd like there was an interesting thing I was watching of people making the same website using different tools. So made it using Wix, using Squarespace, using Framer,
Yep.
using just Figma,
Yep.
like etc. etc. and making something that looks very similar,
Mhm.
but the back end looks quite different.
Yep.
And that was really interesting. But then adding another layer on top of that, I know that it is my other, like my biggest motivation for learning is accessibility.
Mhm.
So knowing that the back end is going to look different for all of those because of how it works.
Yep.
And I don't know which one is more accessible. I've been told, and I've
Mm.
had people look at my site with a JAWS screen reader, for example, and go, no,
Nice.
this is not right. This is not good. I can't use this widget. Oh,
Yep.
okay, sorry, this is a rant, but widgets Or do people just like never test them? Like, do people just not bother to look at them with a screen reader or anything and go, oh, this doesn't work?
People absolutely do not test with a screen reader. It is very uncommon for anyone to test with a screen reader, full stop.
Just
Um,
means that like if there's a form or something that you need to insert, a bunch of people are not going to be able to use it. Well,
the,
that's not fit for purpose. That's like form and function again. It does not function. So I don't care about the form.
you are absolutely correct on that. Um, it's worse than that. There's a phrase you're going to hear from me a lot. It's worse than that. Um, so there's a lot of old computer stuff, a lot of old computer stereotypes about, hackers and sitting and staring at the command line and everything's made of letters and everything being really obscure. And I won't say that some of that isn't just so that it's a little exclusive club. There is some of that. Some things are difficult just to be difficult, and usually we really giggle about that. You can find computer languages that exist only to be hard to program in. That's their whole deal. You won't see them used professionally generally, but like, I've come up with this puzzle too hard for you to solve. Try it. Sure, that happens.
Almost for fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But that's not what most of it is. Most of even these stereotypes, there was some reason for them. Um, So it turns out all those text things and the weird, obscure, sort of down in the bits hacker culture stuff was straightforward to test in a way that a modern friendly graphical environment is not.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, maybe not, easily for those people, but we've got designers and high-end tools. And I'd say, yeah, there's a reason that serious people don't use Scratch, even though I say all these lovely things about Scratch. Like making the more usable, more straightforward thing. You either have to use the same programming mental model of what code is made of, and then it's sort of speaking a foreign language. Like
Yeah.
the way that you design Scratch is not how programming languages work under the hood. It
Mm.
can do a certain amount about that, but by making it friendly for you, it is making it not look like what most people use most of the time.
Yeah.
Um, and so you can either do that translation in the tool, and then you're sort of working at one remove from the real thing. Same problem as Wix, right? You'd like to touch the HTML and you'd like to touch the CSS, but Wix has this extra layer on top, and you're working through it, trying to reach around it.
Mm.
Um, or you get somebody who's a brilliant uh, Renaissance person who comes up with a completely separate programming concept so that the friendly interface is how it actually works. Now, on the one hand, that's not impossible, and every so often it happens. And when it happens, it sweeps the world. Like when that actually works, it's incredible, and everything gets better as a result.
Mm.
Uh, the flip side is that you need somebody who deeply, deeply understands all the interface design and all the programming and can then synthesize them in an unconventional
Yeah.
way. Um, it's so good when it works. It almost never works.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, when you say, everything seems broken, doesn't anybody ever test the widgets for accessibility? It's worse than that. Doesn't anybody ever test the widgets? Occasionally, sometimes. There's not zero of that, but an awful lot of anything that's visual and graphical is still tested by people sitting down in front of it and clicking around.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Ruby on Rails has vastly more testing than that sort of thing used to have, and it's still ugly and awful, and it's still like large steps above anything that didn't pattern itself on Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, there's
that's
that interesting sort of thing. I think it's been helpful to learn as a designer, like coming at it from accessibility and learning more about um, programming
mm,
has been that what it looks like is the least important thing in a lot of ways. Like
mm,
it's on the web, like designing for print is a different thing. Like that is
yeah,
really important because that needs to be accessible as well. But
yep,
but in the way that people interact with the web, everything that it's built on, even if I choose a color, like how that is displayed is built on programming. And
yep,
and if I want something to, but you need to think, what do I want this to do? What is the problem that this needs to solve? And how does this function? Which for me personally has actually been really helpful,
mm,
because I think like it actually, I don't think it is a box. I think it allows you to be even more creative because you think, okay, this has to function. and I want it to work on multiple different levels, like, which is really fab, like really interesting and amazing. But it does mean that I look at a lot of my older design work and go, oh my God, why did I do that? Like that doesn't meet the basic requirement needs to be this functions. And I
Yeah.
think, unfortunately, in a lot of design spaces, and not even coming from the designers necessarily, but sometimes coming like from the clients or coming from the outside, is this needs to look nice.
Yeah.
And it looking nice is like almost the last consideration. Like it's kind of sucks because it's why a lot
Yeah.
of people go in like, I want to look pretty, but no,
Yeah.
I don't actually care about that. It needs to do the job. It needs to communicate what it needs to communicate. And in order for it to communicate even creatively, it
Yep.
also needs to function. Like it, and for it to function, the form has to be correct. Like everything has to work.
Yep.
And I feel like that is where designers and computer programmers and then like you got the UX and the UI people in the like in the middle going, hello, this is really important. Like that's where
Yeah.
we need to meet, and we don't. A lot of the time, there's no conversation. There's a designer using the tools made for them by a developer, having no understanding of them, and then there's a developer going, oh, this person wants it to look pretty, or like this person needs it to do this, but they just don't understand. And they're going, but they do understand, but they also they still want it to do this.
Yeah. Well, and it's we're taking a situation that is everything you just said, and we're making it worse because the real requirement from the user, sorry, from the customer is not normally that it needs to look pretty. That's a proxy requirement for we need to be able to sell it.
Yeah,
And that turns out to be a completely different conversation than almost
yeah,
anything you just said.
yeah,
Because in the same way that it turns out that what companies want from appliances is for them to be worse and break down faster.
yeah. That's true as well.
Very often, it's a genuine conflict of interest. Very often,
Mhm.
if you could produce the good thing that requires the strong conceptual, single pillar framework through all of these things, which is possible, people can do that, and you'll see tools
Mm,
that do it successfully. Um, that would be worse in the sense of not selling more units of thing.
mm.
Um, and so it's hard. I tend sort of gut level pro capitalism as humans go. I feel it's very sad that my fellow capitalists appear to have gone insane and become fascists. But fundamentally, if we could sort of scrape off that layer of, if it's a thick layer, but like fundamentally, I like free markets, and I like the idea that you reward people more who work harder, and if you come up with a clever way to do something that makes everybody's lives better, you should probably get a reward for that. Like fundamentally, that agrees with the way my gut works. Um, but the problem is that, despite that being arguably a good thing, uh, man, the way we're currently doing it, where companies have a massive amount of resources to fully capture the mechanisms of regulating capitalism and change the rules constantly in order to benefit themselves at the cost of everybody else, that eliminates any of those things I might think are good. Uh,
Yeah.
I whether I'm right about that or not, it wouldn't matter because those things are so screwed over that we never even get around to finding out if those would work.
Whether or
Um,
not you agree on a free market, we do not have one because that's not how we don't have capitalism. It's not how it functions. So
yeah, I'm pro-capitalism. It would be nice, and we should have some. And in the same way, Gandhi was pro-Western civilization. You know that lovely exchange. Somebody asked Gandhi, "What do you think of Western civilization?" He says, "I think it would be a good idea."
yeah,
What do I think
yeah.
of capitalism? I'm basically pro-capitalism. I'm all in favor of it. How about we get some of that instead of what we're doing now?
Oh no. Yeah. Okay. I
Anyway,
I shall not share my views. We would get off topic.
yeah, fair. Each of you do. Okay, cool. Well, I feel like we should probably start coming to toward an end of this. I think we've
Hmm.
hit a lot of good conceptual stuff. Um, I would love to talk to you about like Git and how you started on it, but that's definitely going to be one for another
Yeah,
you
no
know,
problem.
for another interview. Um, have I given
Yeah,
you anything useful here? Have you heard anything useful, or are you just getting sort of apologia for why this is all broken?
um, I think that it's, I guess the thing that is interesting is just how much background, like I know that the background is there,
Mm.
Um, but what it makes me think is how much of that background needs to be communicated and to whom?
Yeah.
Like, how much do I need to know? How much do like other programmers like yourself, like if you're having these conversations, how much do you need to think, okay, like, is this information actually relevant, or does it
Mm.
need to, is it going to confuse, not that it's not interesting, but does it
Yeah.
need to, will it confuse this conversation?
Yeah.
Is it going to make communicating easier if I talk to them about this thing, or is it
Yeah.
actually just going to be something that is completely irrelevant to what we're trying to do, and also like add a layer of complexity that doesn't need to be there? I guess
Yeah.
like I'm very like I love science communication and so like
Yeah.
psychom, like, and getting the correct information to people is really important, but also knowing what people need to know, how to make that make the basics really clear, and then show them places to get better information, get more information if they need it, and more information that is still accessible, but not like, if not overwhelming people. I guess yeah, I find the communication particularly interesting, because a lot of the things that you're talking about I find interesting because I'm interested in communicating with developers.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I think, probably wouldn't need to know, and would feel just incredibly overwhelmed and shut down and not be able. And what my goal in a much broader sense for the world is for the disciplines of like anyone working in development, anyone working in computer science, to be able to communicate better with everybody else who doesn't, and is just like, I have a smartphone and I take pictures and send messages, and like I don't have a clue
Yeah.
how it works. And that conflict is very interesting to me.
Yeah. Oh, it's a tremendous conflict, and can absolutely see why. I guess I'll say for people whose goal is not as much communicating with developers as you, but who do want to learn it, one of the things I encounter a lot of in one form or another is that it's very easy, starting from the same sentiment that you mentioned. Does anybody even test widgets for accessibility? Which is a solid thing to think. And in that case, the answer is no. Like your suspicion was correct there. But in the same way, it's really easy to look at all of these levels of things and basically say, am I just dealing with people who are complete clowns on this? Am I throwing my time away? And that's a solid question, right? You only get so many hours a day, and it matters what you spend them on. Um, and so a certain amount of why does it have to be that way? The implicit question is, what's the motivation? Why are they doing this? Like,
Yeah.
it is really easy to go out and find something where a bunch of people are enthused and put your time into it and do the thing, and then discover that the giant forces of capitalism are just about to roll over it and crush it.
Yeah.
Now you can decide to do that. Sometimes people know that, see it, put their time into it, it gets crushed, and like everybody has still felt like they were doing the right thing. That can happen. But a lot of the time, if you don't understand that that's what you're looking at, it's really easy to put your time into, I'm going to make the Mac a real platform for gaming,
Yeah.
and feel like you've just wasted 3+ years of your life.
Yeah. I
Oh,
guess
well, gee, that was stupid.
I guess it feels like to me that we need to have somewhere where the layman can come in earlier in the process and talk to the developers about the bits that will impact them.
Sure.
And even like, and have the developer be able to explain how this will impact the end product, and the person go, oh, okay, actually it would be really like it would be much more helpful to me if the way they impacted my experience of this was this,
Yeah.
rather than that. And that needs to come sooner.
Yeah.
I like, and there needs to be a way for those two groups to talk to each other.
Yeah.
um
Have
and
you
that is interesting to me.
have you found have you found either domain-driven design or Jessica Kerr?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know that she'd summarize herself as being a domain-driven design person, but both the things she writes about and domain-driven design are extremely relevant to what you just mentioned. Uh,
Ooh.
um, Yeah, this is probably another episode as well, but actually we should probably talk about that because it's fantastic. I should send you, the kind of
Yeah,
canonical Jessica Kerr link, the first one you want to read, which gets harder and harder to find, but it's good.
awesome.
Um, and
Thank
maybe
you.
we'll talk about that as well. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, I feel like we're sort of coming to a stopping point. Do you feel
Hmm.
like that? Great.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic to talk about this. I'm definitely hoping we'll do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this an awful
Sounds
lot.
good. I need to carry on, and then I can have other things to talk to you about.
I think we'd find a lot to talk about either way. But yeah,
Yeah.
but yes, do. Yes, please. Oh.